But our work is based upon both the scientific and the spiritual overview. As it is said in Psalm 51, create in me a clean heart, O God, and cast not thy spirit from me. In that one particular psalm, the concept of spirit is used three ways: the new spirit, the Holy Spirit, and the willing spirit. The triple power of body, mind, and spirit is a key expression both in the Sanskrit traditions called the Trichyan and the ancient Near Eastern traditions called the Trinity. If we do not work in the triple power, it's very hard to see the big picture or roadmap of where we are in this vast and awesome change.
We have to start seeing ourselves as different than what we have seen in the past. We are not separate. So what are we? Well, first and foremost, even science is telling us about string theory. Now, I don't buy everything they're saying about it right now, but the idea, just the idea that there's vibratory strings that we're part of, that every atom, every molecule, every subatomic particle is literally vibrating. And it's vibrating not just here, but it's vibrating in like 12 dimensions. And I believe that that's a more accurate picture. We are part of those vibrating strings.
Indeed. In fact, string theory is just one of several approaches for us to recognize that everything is vibrations. And we are one data set of vibratory points, as we see here on the screen unfolding. They vibrate or fold and unfold and twist and produce everything. We are a collection of consciousness vehicles held together by the coherency of the song of creation.
And if you look at it, it is ordered. I think that's the interesting thing. The James Webb Telescope looks back as far as it can into the beginnings of our galaxy. And it recently found at least 6 well-formed, perfectly organized, larger than Milky Way galaxies, and they can't understand, the scientists, how they could have formed. But we go back to what David Bohm was talking about, that there's an implicate order, which is a structure that's behind everything, and then it becomes into the explicate order, which is our reality. So it doesn't take the evolutionary process, even for galaxies that we've been told. And this is known to the Mayans. The Mayans talked about Ixaco-Nuc, which was lady cloth weaver. They believed, and like some astrologers do, that everything has its order, that there was something placed everywhere by a divine patterning. And that includes us as well.
We have many embodiments, as seen here by the Oriental artist, particularly in the Chinese tradition. We also have in the Russian and German recent traditions of the paraphysical, that the human body is one of many embodiments of vibration. David Bohm, as you know, was a student of Einstein who went on to work with J. Krishnamurti from India and suddenly realized what Western science is missing is the whole science of consciousness. So our work at the Academy for Future Science is to give you the overview on the many levels necessary, from archaeology to zoology, from the inner dimensions to the higher cosmic dimensions, forming a new cosmology of consciousness.
So when you see yourself as these vibratory energies that actually penetrate anything and all things around you, but also see yourself as having higher selves, higher mental realities, or at least an overview effect, as I mentioned in one of the panels. And that was something, because what those other heads do is operate in other dimensions. We'll be talking about that in just a minute. But so you have two aspects of yourself, vibrating and that overview effect.
Correct. And so what we are seeing right now is really the science of consciousness taking a dominant position, where people are realizing that both mind as well as the material realm come out of consciousness, capital C, that the universe is a sea of consciousness, and we are swimming in the sea of consciousness. But this also requires us to understand we are also multidimensional beings. I had the opportunity many years ago to work with the upper 1% of scientists in physics and mathematics at Stanford Research Institute. And their conclusion was, after 20 years of science we call the X-Files, is that we are multidimensional beings swimming in the sea of larger consciousness. And it is in this self-realization process that we realize we're local as well as non-local. We're in the third dimension, but we can be in the fifth dimension on up if we have the humility and the sensitivity training. So a lot of the earlier speakers have spoken of all of these different levels of extraterrestrial intelligence. And I'm saying to you, that's secondary. You must have the higher consciousness, whether you call Christ consciousness or Buddha consciousness. You need self-realization of your light body. Otherwise, you get lost in the plethora of very fancy labels and cosmic organizations. That's not the purpose of incarnation. The purpose of incarnation is the divine and human partnership.
Right, and so this is the film Interstellar. How many people have seen that? If you haven't, yeah, I imagine everyone should be seeing it. I'm sure it's on Netflix or Amazon or whatever, because it's a prophetic film, I believe. So what happened is this astronaut, father, if I can say that, went into the fifth dimension, right? Which is really the next dimension, because the third dimension is this kind of square in the room, length, width, height. And the fourth dimension, according to Einstein, and we'll follow him for now, is time. So the
Space-time.
just time. And so we got third and fourth dimension together, space-time. And when we go into now the next level, it'll be the fifth dimension. So the father had gotten to the fifth dimension, you may remember, and then he communicated to his daughter about what to do to save the planet. And she was smart enough to listen to him, right? And she saved the planet. So I think it's the same thing. It's not like, my dad's going to go talk to me or something, but it's the other intelligences that are coming to us. Some of them are coming physically, extraterrestrials. Some of them we call extracelestials that have been here before but are still consciously helping the planet. They can materialize, but they don't have to fly in spaceships. And then there's the ultra-terrestrial, which are really more divine beings, but
like the avatars in ancient India.
But they can still penetrate into our thoughts and our consciousness. And I agree with most of the speakers that we need to open our consciousness minds to receive the information. We can test it, we can use discernment, because if we don't, we're not going to be at the right place at the right time. The emotional body is not going to cut it. The intellectual, logical body is not going to cut it for the future. We need to use that higher over-self body.
And when the two come together, there is this higher synthesis we will call the third brain. And at the same time, we'll call this the higher consciousness. In the New Testament is the mind of Christ that the apostle speaks of. So the realization not only of intention, but extension into the higher realms where you receive, you know, you balance, you vibrate, and ultimately dance in this plane of material existence, knowing that you're connected also with the other planes of creative existence.
Right. Now, we talked last night at the panel about a holographic universe, and we do believe that we are in a holographic universe. That means every part is part of every part. So how do you get the six galaxies appearing way before they ever should have appeared? Well, it's part of the spiraling energy of light that exists in multi-universes. So there's another universe that manifests this universe that's interconnected to other universes. It's all part of the sacred geometry.
And when Karl Pribram talked at Stanford University, he spoke of the holographic mind that has been refashioned and slightly modified by Russian scientists like Dr. Kosnyshev at the University of Novosibirsk in Siberia. But essentially, most of the scientists are accepting the fact that we have a multidimensional mind source that we're connected with.
Right, and so we can tap into those other levels. However, and I want to emphasize this in terms of our own cosmology, this does not mean we live in a simulated universe. A simulated universe would mean that there are other beings out there that can change our timelines anytime they want. They can kill us, they can, make us go backwards and forwards in time. Point is, and I agree a little bit more with Ishmael in this case, we are very powerful. We have our own decisions. Now we should align with these higher forces of light. But still, we are creating, to some extent, our own reality. And although we can end it or not end it ourselves, it is not someone that pulls the plug on us. So that's the difference. Holographic universe, yes, every part is part of every part. We're all integrated and interconnected. Simulated universe where we're just like little toys that someone else is playing the games with, like a virtual reality, not real. We actually do have some level level of empowerment. We're not superpowers, we're not supermen or women, but we do have a power and a role in this universe.
So we are a natural cosmophysical vehicle. We're cosmic, but we're also physical. This was the greatest breakthrough since the splitting of the atom. The recognition by the upper 1% of mathematicians and physicists at Stanford University and also in Russia that the humans are now uncovering the fact that they are not simply two-dimensional beings or even three-dimensional, they are multidimensional beings. And this is why it's so important right now to seize the opportunity and realize this is the quantum change we're all looking at.
And now we're going to get into a little bit of consciousness. So we need to see ourselves as part of a holistic structure, swimming in a sea of thought forms, which function within the quantum field of consciousness expansion and life's evolutionary operations. So where are we getting our thoughts from? Well, some of them are our creative energies that we each represent. I do believe we're each unique divine sparks.
So the pictures that we have, the cosmological and cosmophysical pictures, are so important because it is the right side or the feminine side of the brain that co-creates. Black and white words are sufficient, but not really highly efficient. We need all levels of information that come through pictures, such as this one of the mystical experience. Of course, this is in the Latin language, expresses the Deus, the higher mind of God connected with the overself, which you don't see, but it's an extension of the human mind. This is also what is used in Kabbalistic Judaism and mystical Christianity, where you understand what is called the homo maiestaticum, the majestic human who's able to reach out and understand the other levels of co-creativity.
Right, so we agree with Lynn McTaggart that there's a consciousness field. It doesn't only encompass our world, it encompasses other realities. There's other thought forms from outside of this reality in that consciousness field. But there's what quantum physics says is there's multiple possibilities. If you think you only have one solution, you're actually not accurate. You have multiple solutions that exist in the consciousness field.
You need a roadmap. It's more than words. You need to be able to see graphically, and if you add color, then it's a technicolor experience. If you add music, it becomes a language of vibration and light. If you use sacred geometry, it becomes even a greater experience of your cosmic identity. So this is what we mean, and you see in the mystical literature, the body of light or the higher light experience. Until you can think multidimensionally in color, you're still in black and white reality. You are a slave to the old mindset that says you're nothing, you're unworthy of God's kingdom. You don't understand that the Bible has a Bible within it, written in music and mathematics.
So Parmenides of Elea, before the time of Christ, about almost 500 years before that, said the universe is a plenum. That is, there is no gaps, no voids, no place where there is nothing. So, which means we're all interconnected. Everything is interconnected. This is what quantum physics is showing. You take connected or entangled photons, you divide them apart. You can put one on a satellite, one here. You move the one here, the one in the satellite, instantaneously, faster than the speed of light, actually moves. That science will not deny. This is what we live in. And we do believe that this also applies to consciousness, where every single one of us also has free will, that's important to know, and also input into the quantum field.
So this is the work of Tesla. We realize that our planet is like a power plug. If we understand the whole planet is a type of collective mind, we can put our energies together and move mountains, literally. We can change critical mass situations to one of production rather than destruction. So we're at should we say, a turning point now. Do we go ahead and see the end, or do we see the beginning beyond the end of plastic civilization? And in this process, scientists at Stanford Research Institute and other places of learning have evolved what is called remote viewing. I work with Dr. Russell Tark, who is one of the co-creators, with Dr. Harold Pudoff, with National Security, who was working on this with the American intelligence community back in the 1970s and 80s. I'm pictured here with Russell Targ. We wrote a book together called The End of Suffering, or How to Get Out of Hell Free. And that's by the visualization that Ingo Swann, the great artist psychic, shows on the cover of our book, which is looking at a cosmic egg which represents the human mind collectively. And in that cosmic egg, we see a whirling galaxy. We are in space, but space is also within us, cosmic space. So we can breathe differently, we can energize and vibrate our mind, and we can take a big picture of reality. So what did Stanford scientists do? During the Cold War, they had sensitives like Russell Targ who could see into the Soviet Union, or even Pat Price and the others, secret underground facilities, as we see in the lower portion of the left-hand side of the screen, these huge cranes.
Right. So the one on the left was what the CAA found out existed in the area. The one on the right was exactly what the remote viewer sitting in California was able to pick up on.
Over 6,000 kilometers away, they could see the number of wheels on the tracks. You could see how small the Russian engineer is to compare it to the size of the wheel. The number of tracks, even the overhead cable system that was coming down from the top, all of these small technical realities were grasped in a few seconds by the remote viewers who were sensitive to use the global consciousness.
Right, and so we know Uri Geller, who has been famous. He did some of the early work at Stanford Research Institute, and what you can see is the bottom, which usually was an image kept in an envelope. The people in the room with him sometimes did and sometimes did not know what was in the envelope. So you can see how accurate he was. And we're going to do a little remote viewing experiment here and give you guys an opportunity to come up with this. The whole idea is that everything is in that consciousness field. Everything is knowable. In fact, I highly recommend Russell Targ's movie called Third Eye Spies. He came out with a new book called the same name, but the one on Amazon is fabulous because there was a place that the remote viewers were looking at in West Virginia border. It was an NSA facility. It was during the Cold War, and they were able to go into the file cabinets and get the top secret names of the operations that were going on there.
Connected with NSA. And of course, NSA and the CIA were alarmed that government scientists would have this ability to bypass technology and see what we call the spiritual vision of the third eye, areas of information that were above top secret. We see another example of this in our book called Mind Dynamics in Space and Time. This is the real X-Files book. It's over 800 pages of documentation that I worked on with Dr. Elizabeth Rauscher and Desiree. Elizabeth Rauscher wrote 450 scientific papers. She should have received the Nobel Prize had she lived. But this is one of our experiments. I'm there in Cairo, Egypt. I'm working with this Egyptian scientist, and Elizabeth, 7,400 miles away in Arizona, is taking a look at a certain time of day. She pictures me working with 4 individuals. You can see this in her sketches in the upper left-hand part of the screen. But she's also able to describe the light post that we walk by in our route to the auditorium. And if you look very carefully at the top and bottom of the strange light post, you will see the type of mesh or embellishments that hold up the sphere at the top and the lampstand at the bottom. These are exotic details she was able to pick up, but there was something else to the picture.
Right. It says at the very end of the paperwork that she scribbled on, cobalt blue. Well, it was very unusual, but this particular building at the university in Cairo, the door, some of you may be able to see it, is a metal door and painted in blue, in like a cobalt type of blue. So she picked up 7,400 miles away all these information pieces. And of course, we have more in our book. This is just one of the more
So this has revolutionized communication, revolutionized Egyptology, because we also went under the ground into the tunnels, which she was able to see. Revolutionized sociology, because you can see human relations at great distances. Even revolutionized ecology and environmental science, because this work in China, we could see underground water hydraulic systems. So this, again, is just one of the gifts I believe the ancients referred to when they spoke of the gifts of the Holy Spirit being poured out at the end of time, or the power of the mind to increase its ability of godlike qualities. In other words, we are on a journey of evolution where we reach a point where our mind and body and spirit takes off, but we have to be heart-centered. What is so important in all of this is the Americans were better at this than the Russians because their projects were heart-centered rather than military-centered. Later, of course, Russell had to leave behind the work at Stanford Research Institute because he did not want to see this militarized, because you can only go so far with the military mindset.
Right, and you can use this for many things. We're talking about things that have been proven by, CIA funding and things like that. But Elizabeth used to stay with us for a lot of the month of January, and basically, when I would say to her, Elizabeth, what do you want for dinner? She would remote view the food store. Okay, so you can use it for finding your keys. You can use it for a lot of things. We need to start developing that capability. And this is what extraterrestrials use as well. So as we're evolving, really just stopping being dumbed down, we can use all these gifts. This is what the ancient Egyptians and, of course, those of the Far East
with the pair of hands
understood.
over your head reaching out. That's the overself or the higher self, the ka, being able to reach out, significantly grasp knowledge or reality and bring it down to an earth-based system. On the other side of the screen, we see the Indian, Sanskrit, and even the Chinese traditions of the multiple heads or the higher minds.
But you don't have to be the Buddha or Bodhisattva to do this. We all have that ability. Let me read what the CIA said. Remote viewing is real. It is accurate. It's replicable. It's being pursued by at least the CIA. Actually, this document is from the CDR and some other intelligence agencies. The CIA, the Navy, the Army, and the Pentagon. That it is being pursued for intelligence and military applications. But we also need to pursue it for our own spiritual growth.
And this is why we use these spiritual, artistic cosmograms, because we teach the mind, the left side of the brain, the scientific, how to merge or marry with the right side, again, which is the feminine, the artistic, the musical, the multidimensional. And this is why these pictures show how the body can expand, how the mind can expand even to greater relativities, and see the other psychic entities, the paranormal entities, and even the spiritual entities that do exist in areas of collective growth.
Now, I just want to show you one quick other thing. Ingo Swann was the person who actually did the founding of the remote viewing at SRI. He got Hal Puthoff and ultimately Russell Targ involved as a Trinity to get this funding from the CIA. But he was fabulous. So here's Ingo Swann remote viewed Jupiter in April of 1973, and what he saw was ice crystals in the atmosphere, which he saw clearly created a ring formation, which was only later confirmed. If you want to look at this, it's in the formal report entitled Swann's Remote Viewing Probe of Jupiter. This is what he said. In the morning, they did it very high in the atmosphere. There are crystals, they glitter, maybe the stripes are like bands of crystal, maybe like rings of Saturn, though not far out like that, very close within the atmosphere. And it was actually about 6 years later that the Voyager 1 probe went through by Jupiter and confirmed the ring. So that's pretty profound information.
Why is this so important? Again, we're showing NASA authorities and the skeptics that the spiritual mind does exist, can reach out. There's a whole area, thus, in the consciousness realm that wasn't understood until 30-some years ago. And then this connects also in the traditions of what I will call the paraphysical, the parapsychological, and the mystical, as pictured here as the light body. Here we see an individual who theoretically is able to transform himself using luminal, subluminal, and superluminal light currents. He is also pictured in an area of the world where he begins to see these paraphysical realities of spaceships or realities coming from other dimensions. But
right.
The importance is we all have this ability to reach out through a sense of devotion to divine source, to have a fuller mindfulness, a non-destructive quest for the future without violence, an understanding of spiritual harmony. We see this as a process of Kabbalistic or mystical, Buddhistic, Sufi, Christian, and Zoroastrian thinking, watching our thoughts, and understanding the harmonic of mindfulness. So the use of mantras and vibrations is a process that we use day by day to see our body as a musical instrument. Steve Halpern wrote about this years ago, as the human body was the discovery that there is an instrument of vibration that links all the chakras in our body.
Right, and so some people talked about seeing into the future and seeing into the past. According to Elizabeth Rauscher in this book, which is really about quantum physics, that if you go to the 8th dimension, you can actually see time as kind of beyond a river, we could say, because you can see things into the past, like Project Looking Glass, supposedly the military way of doing that given by the extraterrestrials, or into the future. And I just want to say that remote viewing also works in the future. I put this up because this is from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and they did 7 trials with amateur remote viewers, and you can see they use, for the most part, 9 or 10, and they would ask, is the stock market, this is done in November of 2008, is the stock market going to be up or going to be down? And look across that. The predicted is the same as the actual. Now, I don't tell everyone, and Russell also, who made even money in the silver market doing something similar, I don't tell you to go do this for, the stock market for your personal funding. But I have to say, and because no one feels that's going to really be ongoing and well done, but you can predict the future. You can see, and I don't mean predict, you can actually see the future. From your 8th dimensional reality, you can see what's going to be happening. It gets worse further out because there could be a lot of free will and changes, but in terms of like the next day or the next 5 days or the next, in some cases, even 9 months, it's amazing. This is what Russell Targ's working on now. How far into the future can we predict?
However, the psychic and spiritual mind can only work so far with the material realm. You cannot go and make yourself rich, because that's one of the rules of cosmic consciousness, is you're here to help humanity, not the ego self. And so scientists can only go so far with this type of reality unless they surrender themselves to a common good or a project that enhances the growth of humanity throughout the world.
So as everyone said, this is a very short lecture, but what is going to be the number I'm going to show you on the next slide? So it's a number between, we'll even say between 1 and 9. So it's not 1 and it's not 9, it's somewhere in those other numbers. Let's take a minute. And the way you remote view is you don't do any intellectual overlay. Literally the first thing that comes to your mind. Take a moment of silence. It's 3. Anyway.
Everything works in threes, even in the realm of physics.
So actually, we want to get into extraterrestrials as well as do a meditation, and our time is short.
We have a library, a plethora of music vibratory forms, because again, we're just speaking common language, is the higher harmonic. And this is why it's so important with the mantras. Adonai Elohim. What we sing in Hebrew or Sanskrit, for that matter, in any of the other languages, particularly the ancient languages of the prophets, you can energize all the chakras to work together. And when you do that, you can move objects. You can see through portals of space and time. Otherwise, it's just a word game. Someone sends up their blackboard, this. Well, that's the old situation of one side of the brain. The feminine side, that's vocalized, was turned over historically to the musicians. And they usually had the male and the female working together until the organized religion that said, no, it's only the male that can do this. We leave out the female, except she's in the background. No, the male and the female must come together in the foreground of working together. So we see a female discipleship here in Egypt. She receives from Horus, symbolically one of the great teachers who has the face of the bird, these vibratory signals in color. Look, this is ancient Egyptian pictures of energy forms in sacred geometry, color patterns.
Well,
the 5 levels represent in the keys of Enoch your electromagnetic body, in other words, the normal body, the epikinetic of vibration, the ek of multidimensionality, the inner body of gematria or mathematics, and the higher body of the Zohar, or the splendor of seeing the greater cosmos, the greater mind, which is not only the sun, but seeing the sonship principle. We would call it the Christ principle of evaluations, resolutions of ongoing human reality.
Right. So basically, this is being fed into your mind, can be fed into your mind if you're willing to receive it from higher levels of intelligence. One more thing about the dimensions before we move forward. So the 8th dimension I mentioned is important. It allows you to travel back in time and go into different futures. So you go beyond the limited space as well as limited time. So you don't have to do it from here. You do it actually from this 8th dimensional space.
So the 4 dimensions below connect with the 4 dimensions above. Reflectively, this is the 8th dimensions.
And we believe that your overself has echo bodies which can send you in different realities.
Actually, I'm explaining to NASA scientists that we have to go beyond the extraterrestrial into the extracelestial. We have to realize what the ancients in Israel in the New Testament called the Merkabah, or the light ship, or light vehicle, is something more than physical technology. This will be the breakthrough. The realization that we're going into the higher dimensions, the 5th, the 6th.
Yeah. Well, we can just talk over this for now. So what he saw was a plasma ship, and he was able to actually walk into it. And he said you couldn't feel your arms or your toes. It was all yellow around it. And at one point, he was... we can hear it coming out.
And see the realities behind the Mayan calendar and other sacred space situations, that what we have on this planet is, shall we say, connected with parallel realities of other worlds. And our friend Carlos Diaz goes on to explain, often caves or caverns were historically used as meeting places where the human mind was put into silence, into reflection.
So one time he was taken into this cave of the Mayans, because he was taken with his friend, who was the extraterrestrial, many places in this plasma yellow ship. And he saw 7 globes, and they were kind of glowing. And he realized that they said that they can take something from your spinal column and actually capture your thoughts.
So his mind and his body was able to go into the light ship and come out without being violated. He recognized his multidimensional capacity was being tested, but out of the purity of his heart, his devotion to divine source, he was able to enter into the relationship with those of the light.
So one time he touched one of these globes, and he felt like he was soaring like a hawk or an eagle, and he actually looked around him, and he actually had wings. So they were able...
You see one of the caverns or the caves in Mexico where he entered, where there were strange lights that appeared as small orbs. And then when he got acclimated to the energy field, he suddenly felt he was being teleported into the higher dimension.
But they were actually able to capture the thought forms of these, of ourselves, of other creatures, and actually encapsulate them. That doesn't mean that they held them or controlled them. That simply meant that they stored them like for a library, that they could experience them. Anyway.
And you also realized that the ancient caves in Central America, Mexico, as well as those in Egypt and the surrounding countries, were portals, areas also of archival knowledge. I had the opportunity also to work astronaut Gordon Cooper, pioneer in space, who saw hundreds of spaceships over Germany when he was a test pilot.
Right, we were the consultants for this book, Doomsday Conspiracy, with Sidney Sheldon.
Perhaps the greatest author, who asked me to, and Dr. Desiree, to collaborate with Gordon to speak of the real story of what he saw, what he thought about the future, because Gordon was a man of faith. He prayed when he was in outer space, the Lord's Prayer. He confessed to us that the government was afraid at that time in the 1950s to say that there were hundreds of spaceships watching the events taking place between the free world and the communist world. But he realized also there would be a time where things would have to be put in proper place. And so in the Leap of Faith, he mentions that on April 4th, 1950, President Truman at the time said, and I quote,
and this is in his book, Leap of Faith.
Before official news cameras in a press conference in Washington, I can assure you that flying saucers, given that they exist, are not constructed by any power on earth. A major confession by an American president, unlike those who came after him. He goes on to say, but as I see it now, our government is trapped in a big box of old lies. It's going to take a lot of courage on this part in some future administration to say, quote, folks, our government has been lying to you all these years. Now we're going to come clean and tell you the real truth, quote unquote.
So what Alan Steinfeld has shown us that in the 50s, they were willing to say more than they are willing to say in the year 2023, because we just now had, as you saw, the Senate briefing with Sean Kilpatrick,
the famous physicist,
who wrote this paper with Avi Loeb. Avi will, I think, be at Contact in the desert if you want to talk about it. He's very interested in that Hawaiian name meteorite. And they wrote this paper and said, you know, these meteorites may be, we'll say, intelligently controlled, and they may go around and drop off what's called in this particular paper, which was just released in March, dandelion seeds, so that they can seed various intelligences. So this is kind of the idea of...
There are physical constraints on unidentified aerial objects, but they're still able to operate within our space in violation of the laws of thermodynamics, to reconnect with our consciousness and even leave behind what the ancients called the logos spermaticoi, the cosmic seeds of intelligence design.
Which is the concept of panspermia. But sadly, when Sean Kilpatrick actually got to this hearing, and he was the main speaker, he said, of 650 reports of alien intelligences, we have not had any that can confirm extraterrestrial existence.
No,
so that
I knew
was
Dr. Hynek, I knew others of Project Blue Book that officially closed in 1969, and one was here in California. I will not name the name of the scientist, one of the top scientists at that time in the space program, but he said he went out in the desert. They were watching for a spaceship to come down. One came down. When they went out to the desert, all he saw was a school bus, a red school bus. The extraterrestrial vehicle had changed its form into a school bus. And then when they left the desert, changed back. I've got the written report. It was rejected by Dr. Condon of the Air Force Project Blue Book. But I'm saying on very high levels, we were dealing at that time with multidimensional intelligence that was able to cloak itself or change its physical forms and show simplified forms of the higher reality, so people wouldn't panic.
Right. And so, you know, there's been a lot of, we'll say, cover up. Here's one of the declassified papers. What it does have remaining, you wonder, you know, what they really covered up. This, in turn, is related to the possible propulsion system of UFOs. There is a rumor that fragments of a possible UFO found in Brazil bore a relationship to superconductors and magnetohydrodynamics.
Exactly what is said in the Keys of Enoch. MHD, magnetohydrodynamics, is a way of the physical spaceship civilizations to operate.
And once again, we're going to have to go fast. The James Webb Telescope has been out there looking for water. In fact, water has not only been found in many places in our solar system, but actually now throughout the whole Milky Way.
So you see the water signature file like the fingerprints of the Elohim?
Yeah, this is on WASP 96B, and you can see extensive water signatures. And at the time, they had reported that they have already seen 5,197 exoplanets. I'm sure that's even increased by now. There were 3,833 planetary systems mostly with planets around them. 840 systems are having more than one planet. In fact, really most have about 6 to 7 planets around them.
So what does this mean? We are in a very active area. In my research, through remote viewing, I saw pyramids on Mars and mathematical grid relationships. I also published the city called the Inca City they found in the southern part of the Martian surface. Can you imagine? As you fly over Peru and South America looking down from space, you see a similar construction of these cubical geometries. And they're stacked side by side. This is, again, a real illustration of what I believe to be a lost civilization on Mars. When climate change came along, civilization was wiped out. The survivors, using high-speed ships, made their way to planet Earth. And even the Zulus in Africa speak of people coming from the higher worlds to be resettled on Earth when there was a great change on our sister planet.
Right, and the last picture is the final picture of the Soviet Phobos 2 probe. Right before it went dark, it was a nuclear satellite sent from Russia, and that was the last picture. Everyone feels it was probably a UFO.
So these are books you can order at the Academy for Future Science. These are top-level books. We were the first also to bring to the world's attention what happened in 2004 was the Americans were being visited, what is called.
Well, first, this is actually off the coast of Mexico.
Before that, off the coast of Mexico and Yucatan in the Campeche areas, no less than 11 ships showed themselves.
Yeah, same year, earlier than that. And then this is the Tic Tac, November 2004. The Nimitz and the USS Princeton sent 2 F-18 pilots out, or planes out, with, actually there were 4 pilots all together, and they saw what was going on with this little white Tic Tac around. Then in 2019, the USS Russell, and later on the Kidd and the Rafael Peralta.
So we're being watched from a variety of directions, and we've been told not to put weapons of mass destruction in space. If we do, the cosmic others will neutralize those weapons, as they did with the Russian Phobos probe that used dual-use technology.
And since we were talking about ancient aliens, so to speak, this is the mastodon.
The bones were arranged because they believed they carried the power of the soul.
It's in your museum, 130,000 years old. Some intelligent being placed these in a unique location. It is not being denied.
My research has put us into the discovery of these life forms that we see here, working on the far left with a young woman from South Africa by the name of Elizabeth Clark. A documentary on her life is about to be released. She met with the being from the region of Archon, Midtone, I should say.
In the Centauri constellation, they said they actually lived once on Venus, Earth, and Mars because of the solar changes. She wrote this back in the, well, she had her experience in the 50s. It got published in the 70s. Because of solar changes, they had to leave. They went to the nearest star. No one knew in the 50s, 60s, and 70s what the nearest star was. It used to be thought of as Barnard's star. Well, it's not. It's Centauri. And she said that they went to the Centauri constellation, and that's where she was taken.
She also mentioned the sun is variable, which is something I wrote in the Keys of Enoch in 1973. She was interested in my work because I mentioned Meton, M-E-T-O-N, in the Keys of Enoch. I didn't even know the source of her information, but my information, her information perfectly matched.
So the lower being with the blue shirt, so to speak, is a J-Rod that supposedly came down in Kingman in 1953. And then we have the praying mantis types, and then the stones of Jalisco in Mexico. So
whether you take this real or not, the indigenous people have a very elaborate tradition of how we are not alone, and we must be tolerant of other life forms to see the big picture. When we do, according to the ancients, we become the capstone of information to the Great Pyramid. And guess what happened a few years ago of the Pentagon in Washington, D.C.? Look, you see the capstone. It's in the Keys of Enoch, 1973. The very first picture is this picture, which over the Pentagon.
Right. So at first when I saw this, I didn't believe it. But then our associate, Jaime Maussan, did the research behind it, and they found 4 different people who actually saw them it was 4 in the morning, it was over the Pentagon, and if you look for a minute, not only is it spinning, the people who took these pictures were in a car driving. That's why it's not super stable. But it's interesting that it matches something in 2009 that was over the Kremlin. So take a look at over the Kremlin. This is like a comparison of what was seen. And here's Dr. Hurtak's first picture.
Here's the very first picture of the pyramid capstone over the Earth. How does it happen that I saw this in 1973? Well, I had a spiritual contact, and I was told to illustrate this. Everything from this book, even 2004 is mentioned at the end. Guess what? The landings in Campeche, Nimitz in 2004 was the time that the official news release began from the Pentagon. This is a holy book. You should each have this book because this shows you the higher teachings of science behind mystical Judaism and Christianity as the capstone to bring together the various disciplines. Of course, there are the Oriental and indigenous counterparts. But I'm saying is this is the time that the pieces are being put together from the top. And that's why over the superpowers in Moscow and Washington, D.C., the higher intelligence is saying, put away your military toys. You have to go ahead through love and balance and devotion, not through war games. The time is over to live together in violence. Both sides of the brain and the human heart have to come together. And that's the marriage that John the Divine sees in Revelation. It's the marriage of the Christ nature, the male and female, into the higher dimensional world.
So this is what came out in 2021, starting to release information from the Director of National Intelligence. It goes back, as Dr. Hurtak mentioned, to 2004 as their initial sightings. It basically says the physical objects they've been seeing are seen across multiple sensors, radar, infrared, electro-optical, weapon seeking, and visual observation. Unfortunately, like I said, that April, this past week, a Senate hearing said even less than this. They are going back as far as 1996 now. But let's now move forward to the extracelestial and ultra-terrestrials.
Desiree has illustrated this as the female form.
And also, we're in Alan's book, Making Contact, which we also highly recommend, talking about what making contact is, because the first thing we talked about, remote viewing, but when you've seen a UFO, you don't even have to go see a being that came out of one. When you see a UFO, then you are entangled with them. And we talk about an event that was my girlfriend who had seen something, and that intelligence was with her all the time from that point on.
So making contact first within yourself, with your heart. That's where making contact begins. Because if you don't have inner contact, the outer contact doesn't make any sense. It's too diverse. It tends to be too far beyond what the human mind can conceptualize, understand. But when you see your inner heart as sacred music and mathematics and sacred geometry, as you see your inner heart as a tabernacle of divine spirit, then you begin to align all of the chakras or the seven seals, symbolic logic or symbolism for your complete holistic self. As we see here when we were with the Dalai Lama in Australia in 2009, the sphere appears around his head at the same time a musician is playing on the cello a certain sacred noise. And so this is the daily need for prayer and meditation with music or sacred sound. If you can evoke it within yourself, so be it.
So who are the ultra-terrestrials? They're ones usually, they can appear in a facial form. They can appear, if you wanted to, in certain manifestations of light bodies, but they don't need any of that. They're pretty much consciousness beings, conscious light beings. So I'm going to have to run a little fast. We use music and sound to encourage people to tie into these higher levels of intelligences, and it also helps you with relaxation, relieve stress, higher states of creativity, and interspecies communication. We're going to start with this one mantra.
Yes, in all cultures, the idea was to vibrate the sacred melody, the sound of Mother Earth, which is Om in these Sanskrit cultures of the East, Aum in the cultures of the Near East, and of course Uma, which is also Arabic, but also Tibetan for the world soul. And I'm going to simply intone this one time, if you're willing to join me. 7 times, you can feel the vibration. That's so important, because if we respatialize, we recreate, we must see these 3 vibrations or combinations of sacred seed syllables vibrating within us that allows both sides of the brain to come together in resonance. This is the synergistic orchestration of life as we see in the cosmogram of all of these figures going from a singularity into a multi-use of collective unity.
That we are physical beings, but above us is our higher overself. And that overself knows more than we do, but it can feed us information, feed us energy, feed us greater wisdom. There's
the triple power together gives us what is called the avatar. What has been made popular by James Cameron and others like him is the realization that we wake up to a greater self. And we use that in service to all humanity, from the smallest child who has no parents to pray for his or her soul, to the animal who needs devotion and touch, to the fullness of humanity that needs a sense of unity, of vibration. So each of us become transceivers, each of us become musical instruments, each of us become pillars of light, knowing how to be the light. And that starts within. And through this, we create sacred space. In other words, we take time to create space, within ourselves, and also without ourselves, to see that we are in unity. We need to accept also that every single one of us also has free will and input into the quantum field. Namely, the quantum transitions are the missing factor in traditional science, religion, and psychology. It is the hidden combination of the energy bodies together with music that allows us to ascend, as we see here in the Eastern traditions of how our body is a musical instrument, or the concept of Adi Shakti Om, the mother of the creation of the seed syllable Om, dancing upon the waters of creation. Christ taught his disciples literally to walk upon the waters of consciousness. We take the privilege of spiritual freedom and unfoldment to dance and walk upon the waters of creation in all directions. That is omnidirectionality. That Om of the East goes with the Om of omniscience in the West. That Om goes with the Aum for the Amen. That Om goes with the collective consciousness of the Ummah. Within and without, we see ourselves as the artist has depicted here, with angelic wings coming down.
So when our thought processes are aligned in service, this helps us receive higher information that is then fed throughout the body and ultimately shared with the earth. As we move to the next picture, let us send thoughts of love, peace, and healing throughout the planet.
This is the return of the dove symbol. This is also the symbol of Tesla, with his confessions, the return of the dove.
Nikola Tesla. So let us also think about places like the Ukraine and Russia. Let us think about actually Taiwan and China. But also right now, let us think about also Sudan. Very, very much in need of our prayers for peace. And believe me, this is one of the reasons that the extraterrestrials have not made themselves more known, because we are really people who like to have tribal warfare. They don't want us out there until we get beyond these inner struggles that we have with one another. And so as we send that energy around the earth,
the Om from the East comes together with the Shalom of the West, and it's Om Shalom, the beautiful vibration that covers the earth. A student of the keys, Carlos Santana, calls it the global tone.
Universal
the raising
tone.
of consciousness into a universal tone where all of our hearts, as the tabernacle of spirit, begins to rejoice in our higher nature. We realize in this the grace and the gratitude of God within us that leads to the glory of the higher self, the new self, the future self.
So let us send through remote viewing our energies of peace to these parts of the world, or wherever you feel it's needed.
Of change, it's not only sacred space, but creative space. It's the unity and the concept of service to others, seva. We are saved to serve, being slaves to no one but servants of all. This is the loving majesty that we have put on in our incarnation to come here to help liberate the world from material preoccupation into the sharing, into the harmonic of the mind, body, and spirit in unity. As the human hearts come together, they form the heart of the world.
So as we close in our meditation, let us see the vibrations of ourselves connecting with our higher selves.
Like musical notes, we go higher, 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 from the self to self-realization to the overself, the Christed overself, the Elohistic overself, to which the dove of peace ultimately comes on the horizon.
And let us see the spiritual guides and other levels of intelligence helping us, even from the power of the divine spirit in our midst. And then let us stand outside the earth and send in love-powered radiations to all of the planet.
How beautiful, how majestic, how great thou art. You who are Al Shon, you who are Al Elyon, the Most High, you who are the Atik Yomim, and all ancient names, you come through us to present the divine spark. That we are being blessed as we are graduates now from Schoolhouse Mother Earth to the University of the Cosmos.
And let us realize the cosmos is full of beings of intelligence. When you get to the 5th dimension, the 8th dimension, the 24th dimension, you'll find myriads and myriads and myriads of beings of energy and higher intelligence.
It begins now here in this body of three-dimensionality. As we take our sacred geometry of the inner eye, the inner mind, the third eye, as we operate within multidimensional realities of humans and transhumans and those of the angelic kingdom, let us realize the glory and the grace that brings us into harmonic unification. And thus we step through the time door. What the government's wish is something even greater. That comes through the peace of the divine spirit. The Holy Spirit, or the sacred dimension, suddenly makes us aware of our light body. Yes, the ancients understood this as the opening of sacred geometry, the four doors of the holy temples that were pictured in the Far East and the Near East, in the New World. But it's more than the opening of the doors. It is the opening of the windows of spirit. It is the opening of all dimensions through which we graduate. And when we graduate, we understand the peace that passes all human understanding because we operate through our angelic wings. The higher body is like an angelic dimension of wing-like geometries. We feel it, we use it, we sing with it, and we are empowered by it. And so we bless you as we continue this humble awakening to avoid violence, to avoid commercialization of spirit, and to recognize the higher way is a way of partnership.
Thank you for joining us today.